Yeah, sure. Sure.
Shipriya ma'am, would you like to
Yeah,
introduce or the webinar, or we'll
sure, sure, ma'am.
start?
I will just take it through. Good evening, dear participants. Thank you for joining in for the Center in collaboration with BSSCA webinar series for teachers, which was conducted. And today is the fifth day of Center webinar series for teachers. Before we begin with the program and before I take my privilege to introduce the resource person, maybe just join in for a 1 minute or maximum 60 seconds prayer. Just join your hands and we will think of the Almighty. And generally, I start the session with just keeping in mind the light, the brightness that is Deepam. Deepam Jyoti Janardana, Deepo Harati Papani, Sandhya Deepam Namostute. Vande Gurum, and thank you, all of you, for joining me for the prayer. And it's been really nice that you've all been attending the webinar series with CENTA, and BSSCA in collaboration with CENTA have made it possible for all the participants to join, and the takeaways are umpteen. You must have had a wonderful experience through the last 4 sessions that you have attended. My dear participants, a hearty welcome to the fifth webinar series conducted in collaboration with BSSCA and having Center being a pivot and helping us to learn much better. About Center, you must have heard, and this is the fifth day, a fifth week where I'm talking, but yet keeping in mind the new joinees. I would like to mention Center for Teacher Accreditation is a registered certification trademark in India, catering to the entire professional life of a teacher, certification, career growth, professional development, and helping organization recruit, support, and grow their teachers towards high quality education. Center currently serves over 6 lakh teachers and 12,000 institutional leaders, promoters from across 6,000 plus cities, towns, villages across India, and also 40,000 teachers from other countries, namely UAE, Philippines, Nigeria, etc. A hearty welcome once again to all the participants who have joined us for this session. We have with us the resource person, Ramya Venkatraman, who is a founder and CEO of Center for Teacher Accreditation Center Private Limited, an alumni of IIT Delhi and IIM Calcutta. Ramya had a 15-year career with consulting major McKinsey and Company, and post that took the entrepreneur plunge to pursue her long-standing passion for education. CENTA is a 7-year-old company working to make teaching a more aspirational profession. CENTA's community now has more than 6 lakh teachers and 10,000 teachers, as I have mentioned earlier. So, Ramya Venkatraman, who is none other than founder and CEO of CENTA, is here to take you through this session as of today. Thank you, ma'am, for being here. And it is very nice to have you here. And also, you have been widely recognized for your work, including one of the 15 Women Transforming India by Niti Aayog and United Nations among 50 leaders reviving India's education by Education World for outstanding contribution to national development by IIT Delhi as a distinguished alumni of IIM Calcutta, as an Ashoka Fellow, the Global Social Entrepreneurship Network, and so on. A hearty welcome and my humble pranams to you. Over to you, ma'am.
My pronouns, and thank you, ma'am, for giving us this opportunity to run these sessions in collaboration with Bangalore Sahodaya. I think we've had some very participatory sessions so far. And today being the fifth one, we are again looking forward to the group engaging actively on this medium. Today's session specifically is on the topic of the power of a leadership community. And you have already talked a lot about CENTA and what we do. As you said, a lot of our work is for teachers in an end-to-end manner, cutting across certification of teachers, training, career growth. Now, there is equally a significant part of CENTA's work which is dedicated towards school leaders. And in particular, it is around building a community of school leaders, enabling school leaders to have a lot more interaction with each other, having a school leader training and certification, supporting school leaders in recruiting and growing teachers, and so on. So, today's session is part of some of the work we do with school leaders, and we hope it's a useful contribution to Bangalore Sahodya's ongoing efforts in teacher development and school leader development. So with that, let's begin the session. I'm going to first request everyone to go to www.mentee.com. So we'll start right away with the interaction rather than any kind of lecture. So www.mentee.com. Uh, you can go to that from another device if you're holding one, or you can take another window on the same device, and please enter the passcode 77038607. And I'll also request my colleague to share her screen so that the passcode is visible. 77038607. Yeah, so you can see the passcode here. So please go to www.mentee.com 77038607. So once you can I get a few yeses on the chat if you have been able to enter the passcode?
It just has an instructions which is being written. That's it.
Correct. So it just says go to www.mentee.com and enter the passcode. If you have entered the passcode, please put a yes on the chat. Okay, we have at least a few yeses, quite a few yeses now. So with that, we'll move forward. So the first question you will see over there is, what percentage of your staff today are leaders? So you can just enter the percentage approximately in text. What percentage of your staff are leaders? We have started getting the responses. Great. And please avoid looking at the screen. Please enter your own response. Okay, we'll give another minute before we close this question. I'm seeing a wide range: 10%, 25%, 30%, 50%, 60%, 5%. So, wide range of responses: 3%. But I think it'll be safe to assume that 10 to 20% is what many of you are talking about. Okay, let's move to the next question. What would you like this percentage to be in 1 year? So you had a percentage that you gave. What would you like this percentage to be in 1 year from now? There's a different page coming on screen. Okay, we have quite a few responses. So there are people who would like it to go to 25%. Some are saying increase by 20%, uh, 90%, 50%. I see one response to lessen the percentage because there is a duplication in tasks. Greater than 50%, 100%. Okay, so each of you has some thoughts on what you would like the percentage to be. Let's go to the next question. What would it take in your mind for this shift? So, whatever shift you mentioned, whether it's 10% to 20%, whether it's 25 to 50 or 10 to 50, 10 to 90, whatever shift you mentioned, what would it take for this shift to take place in the next 1 year? So we are just looking for early thoughts from all of you, and many of you here are principals leading your school. So early thoughts on what would it take for this shift to take place. So just a small input to whoever said 5% right now. I think we were on the previous question, but right now we are talking about what would it take. So what are some actions or ideas or yeah, great. So training, I'm seeing perception about ourselves, assigning of roles, more teachers developing leadership skills. Yeah, awareness, readiness, improvement in conditions of work, updating professional growth. People need to unlearn, reorganizing. Mentorship. Okay, wonderful. So these are some great ideas which have come up on the list, and all of you can also read what is on screen that your colleagues have been talking about. Let us go to one more question before we close Mentee, which is the last question for now. What are some possible challenges that you see? So you all had several ideas on how do you make the shift in increasing your percentage of leadership. What are some possible challenges that you see? Okay, lack of interpersonal skills that several people might be facing. So what are some challenges? Can we have more challenges? Of course, if you're not facing any challenges, that's also great. Okay, okay, I just had to say that, and we had a whole lot of them. So okay, poor attitude towards change, hectic life, emotional feeling, misunderstanding, reluctance in accepting gray areas, etc. So you can read on the screen many things that different people over here feel with respect to challenges in developing leadership. Okay, so this exercise was just for you to get started in thinking about your own environment, your own situation with respect to leadership, what you are trying to do with it, what are some challenges. What I want to ask you now, and you can answer on the chat, is when you said that 10% are leaders or 25% are leaders, etc., who are the people whom you had in mind? So, were they like your principal or your coordinators? Who were the people you had in mind? How did you count 10% or 25%? So, for the people who just joined, as quick context, we asked everyone what percentage of your school uh, staff are leaders, and there was a wide range of answers, but I would say that the average might have been 10 to 20%. We also asked people what would you like that to be. Again, wide range of answers, but average may have been 25 to 50%. Now we are asking, or I'm asking, so whom did you count? So we have several people talking about principal, coordinator, HOD. We have Sylvia Okoro saying class teachers, uh, Kumar Rajesh saying colleagues. Sudha defines it with a role, one who can allocate or assign work according to other people's abilities. Okay, so interesting set of interesting set of answers. And yeah, Vamshipriya ma'am says new joinees as among the leaders you count. Great. So many interesting answers over here. What I'm going to do now is share my screen for some opening thoughts on a concept that we want to go deep into today. So, when you talk about a percentage leadership, you are very often looking at, okay, I have 100 people in my organization. Of that, 5 are leaders, so 5%, or 20 are leaders, so 20%. Now, this is what we typically and traditionally refer to as individual leadership. So, who are the individuals who are leaders? And how do you rate their leadership? And then you say, okay, some of them are good leaders, some of them are bad leaders. In fact, somebody said we need to lessen the leadership because there are overlapping activities. So you find, okay, not all your leaders are productive. But all of these views are when we talk about the theme of individual leadership. Now, increasingly, a lot of researchers and practitioners around the globe talk about something called collective leadership. Now, what does collective leadership mean? And I'll just share a summary that we have put together from a range of sources. So, first of all, when we talk about individual leaders, we are typically referring to a few heroes. So, we all read about great leaders growing up. We see people in our ecosystem. We see like our school principal. We see the head of our organization, whatever. So there are a few quote unquote heroes, depending on the context you are in. We see the leaders of our country. Whereas the whole idea of collective leadership is that everyone is a leader in their own role. So somebody said class teachers, somebody said new joinees. So, irrespective of what role you are playing, there is a leadership element in that role, and everyone is a leader in their own role, is the thesis and idea behind collective leadership. Now, what this translates to is that in individual leadership, typically leaders or organizations specify goals and quote unquote followers enact these goals or fulfill these goals. Whereas in collective leadership, a group of people develop goals in what you call a spirit of shared responsibility. So you decide as a group that these are the goals of my organization, and that becomes the basis for everyone to act. Similarly, again, a lot of individual leaders work for common good. In fact, all the great leaders we read about or hear about, many of them work for common good. But the definition of common good is very often by a smaller number of people. Sometimes it could be elected representatives. Sometimes it could be defined by the hierarchy of an organization, but that definition is by a smaller number of people. Whereas in collective leadership, common good is natural through collective decision. So the entire group is deciding what is commonly good for us. Now, when you think about increasing leadership, so we talked about what it takes to go from 10% to 25% or 25% to 80%, etc., etc. In your mind, when you're thinking individual leadership, increasing automatically means how do I develop more people? How do I train them? How do I mentor them? How do I increase their interpersonal skills? How do I increase their technical skills, etc., etc.? Whereas collective leadership focuses, of course, on developing individual skills, that is necessary, but also focuses on spurring collective action and creating an environment of leadership. So, developing individual skills is not sufficient. In fact, some researchers on the topic would argue that it may not even be very necessary. When the environment of leadership is there, everyone's leadership automatically emerges. And of course, there are debates around this. What is the amount of focus needed on individual leadership when you are trying to get to collective leadership? But it is very clear that focusing on individual leadership is not enough if you are trying to get to collective leadership. It becomes important to also create an enabling environment around it. And the last thing I want to talk about, and of course there are many characteristics of these, but the last thing I want to talk about is cooperation or dialogue, which in an individual leadership structure is often through defined structures, whereas when you are targeting collective leadership, it becomes important for cooperation and dialogue to happen much more in what you would call flow. And we've of course summarized this from several sources around the world that you see mentioned here, and some of them are mentioned and several other conversations and experiences. Now, let me come back to the conversation. I'll just stop sharing for a minute and come back to the conversation. So all of you talked about the percentage of leadership you have, the percentage that you would like it to go to, what initiatives you would take, what challenges that you face. Now, having heard about this difference between individual leadership and collective leadership, what is your sense on what kind of leadership you inherently had in your mind when you were giving those answers? So, did you have individual leadership in mind or collective leadership in mind? Okay, I see a lot of you saying collective leadership, some of you saying individual leadership. From my point of view, when I look at the answers in the Mentimeter, I would say that majority of the answers reflected the typical answers that one comes across when we are intuitively thinking about individual leadership. That is, there are a few designated leaders to make others leaders. How do we train them? How do we mentor them? Etc. There were, of course, a few answers that talked about the enabling environment. There were a few that talked about everyone being a leader. But irrespective, I think what I'm reading from the chat right now is probably that collective leadership is something that all of you would like to know more about or would like to bring about in your own environments. And that's what the rest of this session is going to be about. So again, I want to be clear that there is nothing right or wrong about this. So we have had very, very big things happen in the world with individual leadership. At the same time, the feeling that several practitioners and researchers have had in recent decades is that with the problems of the world becoming more and more complex, individual leadership is not enough. And that's where it becomes important to move organizations towards more and more collective leadership. So it's not a bad starting point if you have a set of strong individual leaders in your organization. In fact, there are several organizations which don't have enough individual leaders. But if you have that starting point, then the question becomes, how can you move towards collective leadership? And in the rest of this session, in the next half an hour to 40 minutes, we'll get into some of the nuances of collective leadership. What are the pros and cons, challenges, dilemmas, etc. So let me start with what I would consider to be one of the most common dilemmas when an organization is trying to move towards collective leadership, which I would call the leader's dilemma. And in this, you will see that leader is in double inverted comma. So this refers to the official leader. So, like the principal of a school or the head of an organization, or if you are part of a large community, the head of that community, whatever. So, it refers to the official leader. So, the leader's dilemma very often is, do we want to encourage more leadership, or do we want to encourage less leadership? And of course, it seems like, the good thing to do is to encourage more leadership. But Can I get some thoughts on the chat on why leaders may encourage less leadership? What could be reasons for leaders to encourage less leadership? So, a lot of you said you would like collective leadership, or that's in fact what you're already thinking about. Now, having said that, it is commonly observed that leaders are not comfortable saying, okay, I want my whole organization to be leaders. Why is that? Yeah, so Madhukuru Fanindra says many minds leading to confusion. Purnima Jaiswal says more minds leading to conflict. Munawara Sheikh says yes, we can have collective leadership, but with prescribed roles. So if you have more and more collective leadership, there could be the unclarity in roles. Zainab Khan says insecurity. Yeah. So a lot of leaders can be insecure about collective leadership. Irom Usharani says decisions will be more easily taken when there is less leadership. So you feel like your decision making is going to slow down. Neha Akhori says that the leader may be dominating and therefore not want collective leadership. So that's similar to the insecurity. Jayanti Rajagopalan says power and goals will be different. Again, Pooja Goel talks about the leader having a dominant personality. We'll come back to Shia's comment later, Shia Suan's comment later in the next part of what we are going to do, which is on the people side of it. So request you to hold on to that thought for a minute. Eric Leo says that there could be a fear that people are not ready for change, and I'm asking for collective leadership. Okay, so many other such questions. Too many cooks spoil the broth, difference of opinion, state of confusion. One leader might be needed for guiding, and we may not have positivity from everyone. So, a lot of reasons why more ego and comparison will be there. So, a lot of reasons why leaders have this dilemma where per se it looks great that yes, I want 100% of my organization to be leaders, I want collective leadership. But when it comes to the point, am I really comfortable with it or not? And going back from today's session, as one takeaway, I would strongly urge each of you in your own capacity as leaders to think about what in your own mind is potentially reducing collective leadership in your organization. So, what in your own mind is possibly bottlenecking it? And that is one post session exercise I would suggest for whoever wants to do it. Let's go to the second nuance of this. And this is with respect to the entire team. And here I'll refer to Chia Suan Nyo, who says that we want people to work with a good conscience, self awareness, working for the good of the organization. Now, let me share my screen again to ask you another question. Does everyone in the team want collective leadership? So, we talked about whether the leader wants collective leadership or not, and why leaders may sometimes not want it. Does everyone in the team want collective leadership? What do you feel? So, all your new joinees, all your teachers, all the people who, yeah, so okay, many people are saying no, not at all, partially, not everyone. Okay, so there is a very strong sentiment saying not everyone wants collective leadership. Okay, let's move to the why. Why do you think some people don't want collective leadership? Yeah, so Supriya has already moved to the why. Some people think it is a burden to have leadership. Okay, Eric Leo says some people don't want to be held responsible. Modukuru says team role is quite different from leadership role. There could also be elements of confusion, objectives being different. So you can see that there are many reasons why everyone in the team may not always want collective leadership. So I think you've captured many of the reasons. Some of them which are on the screen here are alignment of goals. So it is possible that an individual in the organization is okay doing his or her own work, but is not necessarily saying that the organization's entire goal is mine. So I'm okay to do my job, but I'm not here to do everything that the organization is doing. There is an element of motivation and drive which varies a lot across people. There are people who are saying there is work life balance and I want a certain boundary. If I'm looking at leadership, then does that boundary exist or not? So these are the kinds of questions which lead, and I think all of you captured it much more than what's captured on this slide. But these are the kinds of questions which lead a lot of people in the team to not want collective leadership. But which then brings us to another important dilemma in a school environment, which is that in many other organizations, we can actually say it's okay. We don't need collective leadership. It's fine. Some people are leaders, some people are just doing their jobs. But in a school, it becomes particularly difficult to say that because in the classroom, the teacher is fully determining outcomes. And yes, the school provides certain types of support in the form of training, materials, mentorship, whatever. But ultimately, if the teacher does a great job, he or she is fundamentally impacting future individuals, the future of the country. If the teacher doesn't do a great job, he or she is again, fundamentally impacting that. So the role of the teacher is such that each and every person in the school or each and every teacher needs to be a leader. So, in some ways, a school is an entity where collective leadership is not much of a choice. I think most of us have the luck or the luxury in organizations where we can say it's okay. And to repeat myself, we can say that yes, I want to move towards collective leadership, but it's okay. For the time being, we are living with a subset of people acting as leaders. But in a school, that becomes very costly every day because each teacher who doesn't operate like a leader is having a profound impact. So, coming back to the chat, where when we discussed who are you thinking about when we talk about leaders, and some of you talked about um, principals, coordinators. Absolutely. I mean, they are very much playing a very clear formal leadership role. But when you think about collective leadership, it becomes pretty much each and every member of the organization, and in this case, primarily your teachers who are leaders. And this is where the definition of leadership becomes important. So, very often when we say leadership, it is assumed that it has to be beyond your quote unquote regular job. So, in fact, there was also a comment on the Mentimeter scroll where somebody said, I'm very busy with my regular job. So, there is no time to be a leader, or people who feel that it can be an extra responsibility. So, the definition of leadership is not necessarily that there is your regular job and then there is being a leader. Question is, how do you bring that together? So how do you do your regular job as a leader, or what does it mean to do your day-to-day job as a leader? And that's my next question for you on the chat. So if you were to define, what does it mean to do your day-to-day job as a leader, what would that be for your teachers? And let's specifically talk about teachers, since most of you are leading teachers. What does it mean for teachers to do their day-to-day job as leaders? So it's not doing something else. It is being a leader while teaching. What does that mean? Any thoughts? Anybody? Yeah, sure. So Chian Suanyo says teachers are leaders in their own classroom. Can we hear a little more? Okay, Eric Leo says set a good example. That's a great example of being a leader, setting a good example as a teacher. What else could you be doing? Yeah, so we are coming across many good examples now. So open to creative thoughts and positive approach, Zainab says. So as a teacher, you're coming to a particular formula where a student is asking you, so why can it not be this way? What is your natural response, and how do you remain open to alternative thoughts? Taking decisions related to children, says Vijay Lakshmi. Taking the class together as one, Shiva Mehrotra. And I'm not reading out all of them because we have a lot of them and you can read them on the chat. I'm just reading a few as examples. So motivating children, being role models for students, walking our talk as teachers, being open to learn, solving upcoming problems, making the class democratic, encouraging children, getting them involved. So, as you will see from all your comments, being a leader is about how you run your class as a teacher, not necessarily doing something else. Yes, in addition, you may also want the teacher to take initiative on other things, etc. But we are not even talking about that. How can you be a leader in your day-to-day job as a teacher? And that becomes a critical thing for any school to solve. So, which also means that as schools and as school leaders, when you recruit and grow teachers, you need to figure out what are those competencies you are looking for, where everyone in your team over time can be a leader and you have an environment of collective leadership. So, again, coming back to the theme of collective leadership, there are two parts of it. One, how do you build individual capabilities? So the individual capability doesn't go away in collective leadership. And two, how do you create that environment where everyone's individual leadership can flourish? So with that, let me again share my screen for the last couple of slides, which is one, when you think about building individual capabilities, teaching is a very nebulous activity. And therefore, a question that often comes up is, what is it that we are looking for in our teachers, either our new teachers or our current teachers? What are we looking for? And as an organization fully focused on teachers, one of the things we have been very strongly developing over the last 7 years is what we call the CENTA standards framework. So, where we try to break down the competencies which are required from a new teacher, from an experienced teacher, from a senior teacher, keeping in mind that you as a teacher are or need to operate as a leader on a continuous basis. So, what are the competencies that you need towards that? And this document, which is called CENTA Standards, is available publicly. Any of you can download it and use it in your own way of defining competencies, defining professional development, training needs, etc. And now luckily, we've also been able to play a very strong role in supporting the government in developing the national professional standards for teachers using some of this experience. So the country as a whole is also moving towards teaching competencies through NEP 2020. And as leaders, it becomes important to think about what are these competencies. So that's the first part of collective leadership, which is how do you keep building individual skills. The second part, of course, becomes how do you create an environment for collective leadership. So here, let me come back to the chat and ask all of you, how would you build an environment for collective leadership? So now let's not talk about training or mentorship or building individual skills. That is one part of it which you have talked about. Let's talk about what is that environment where leadership can flourish as a collective, which is more than the sum of individuals. Okay, so Munawara says creating a positive culture. Can we have a little more detail what the positive culture could look like? So, how do you build an environment for collective leadership? Yeah, so Supriya says when we encourage everyone to share ideas. So, that's a very nice practical tip. So, some organizations, for example, have boards where people can pin up their ideas and everyone looks at them and tries to see, okay, what can we use out of this? Or somebody is pursuing something, they reach out to everyone else saying, okay, how can I do this? Yeah, so wide range of ideas which have come up. So giving more experience and variety of activities. Gurpreet Kaur says, opportunity is a common theme that many of you have put down. So probably a very practical thing is how do you create those opportunities where people can come forward and share something and contribute more broadly. Common goal. So this becomes an important one, which Jayashree Mishra has spoken about. So the point is that when you want your teachers to come out of their classroom and share inputs, share ideas, all that may still be quote unquote additional work. But when you have a common goal saying that this is what we are trying to achieve for our students, and how can each of our teachers achieve that goal, the common goal itself serves towards people becoming leaders within their day-to-day job. Yeah. So many other interesting ideas that have come up around healthy competition, rewards and incentives, role allocation, clear communication. So again, we will not, in a short session, we will not get into all the different theories around this. But I'll just say that these are all interesting ideas. And I will once again share my screen to leave you with a few thoughts on how do you create an environment for collective leadership. So, collaboration. So, how do you get people to naturally collaborate? So, where collaboration is not a taboo thing, so where it is considered, in fact, very good for a, say, a fourth standard maths teacher to go to a third standard maths teacher and say, look, I'm struggling on this particular concept, can you help me with it? And it's considered very positive. How do you build open feedback loops where it is okay for, let's say, a teacher to tell another teacher, look, I'm hearing that your students are not too happy. And it doesn't require to go through school leadership. It doesn't require to go in formal feedback. It's a simple sharing between two colleagues, or setting own goals. So the point about how your school as a whole has a common goal and individual teachers can set their own goals, and there is an agreement explicitly that yes, this common goal works for me also, or if it doesn't, then why doesn't it work and how do we modify the common goal? Similarly, mutual accountability. So where peers don't have to go through a coordinator or a principal or anybody in the hierarchy to hold each other accountable. So there is, let's say, a planning meeting and one teacher lands up late, and it's completely okay for another teacher to say, why don't you be on time? And it doesn't take the principal to say that. So these are some of the ways in which you could possibly be creating an environment of collective leadership. So again, to summarize, uh, I will leave you with 4 post-session exercises for whoever is willing to do them. And as teachers and principals, you are giving homework all the time. So I think it's only fair. So point number 1, to reflect on yourself as a leader, how comfortable you truly are with collective leadership, or what is it in your mind that may be bottlenecking it sometimes. Point number 2 is reflecting on your team and whether they are ready for collective leadership, and in some cases whether even the meaning of that is understood clearly. So is the meaning understood as, oh, I need to do something else, or is it understood as, in my day-to-day job I can be a leader, and how much of your team is ready for that? 3 is to come up with ways in which you can build individual competencies towards collective leadership. And as I said, the CENTA standards are freely available as a structure to think about this. There can be many structures. Your schools might have your own structures. You may have your own structures. So in whichever way works for you, how do you define the way of building individual competencies? And finally, what are the things you are going to do on Monday morning with respect to the environment? So what are you going to practically change at a very simple level with respect to the environment? So these are the 4 post-session activities I would suggest. And with that, happy to take any questions or comments from any of you before we wrap up. And while you are putting down your questions, I want to share one last thought from my side. So when you see the diagram on the screen, this can be an interesting visual for you to reflect on. So there is one collective, which is the teacher and students in the class, and how can that have collective leadership where the teacher as well as the students are taking full ownership of what is happening in the class and how learning is taking place. There is another collective around that, which is the school itself, and how the school as a collective can operate together, and each and every member of staff operating as a leader in the school, each and every member of staff, each and every student operating as a leader in the school as a collective. And finally, around that, a broader community. And here we are talking about school leaders. So when you think about a network like Sahodaya, for example, where many of you come together, how can you be a collective for the broader goals of education? And coming back to what I said in the beginning, when we as CENTA are trying to bring school leaders together as a community, one of the things that we want to keep coming back to is how can you as school leaders support each other in the broader goals of education. I don't think we have any answer on how that will happen, but we are hoping that many of you who are already part of the community and others who are part of it will evolve those answers, and that's what the collective means. So this might be an interesting visual for you to keep in mind as we end the session. And with that, yeah, I'm also just seeing the chat. I don't think there are any specific questions. There are many more interesting tips from all of you. So would encourage everyone to read the chat. There is there is a rich set of thoughts there, much beyond what I have shared. And a couple of you have asked for the link to the feedback form. It is there in the chat also. So please do fill the feedback form. We look forward to your inputs as we continue learning what is useful for teachers and school leaders. Okay, so yeah, I think I just yeah, I think with that we are exactly at 6. I think it's one of the rarer sessions which we have ended on time. But thank you very much for the active participation from everyone. I think the richness of experience in this group clearly comes across in the way you have given your inputs. And yeah, there's one question which I may just quickly take. Those who need to drop off can drop off. So Eric Leo asks, is it possible to encourage collective leadership without individual leadership? So frankly, Eric, I would say that I'm not experienced enough to give a concrete answer to that question. My hypothesis is that individual competencies become very important, individual motivation becomes very important, because ultimately the collective is still made of individuals. Having said that, the problem when you are overly focused on individual competencies and individual motivation is that you don't focus on the environment that can support that collective leadership. So the question is, how do you really strike that balance where you don't allow individual leadership to overpower, and where you are sufficiently focused on the environment for collective leadership also? Is it possible to have a collective entirely without individual leadership? Don't know. Okay. Um, Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. And with that, hope you've got the link to the feedback form, and we'll end the session over here. Thank you.